for digital lending company called as DMI Finance. We are one of the Asia's biggest digital lending partner who focus on NTC lending. Currently, I have 2 decades of experience in technology and cybersecurity.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. My name is Kamaiah. I'm heading security at Upstocks, having 18 years of experience into software industry. I started my career as a Java JT developer, and then I moved into security domain. And it's been almost 12 plus years of journey into cybersecurity. Yeah.
Thank you. Before we get started, just want to set a context here, right? So, in terms of giving some numbers. Any idea how many fintechs we have globally? Any numbers, random numbers? Some numbers? Okay. So according to Statista, right, the number of fintechs that we currently have as of 2023 is 20,000 plus, right? So that's the amount of fintechs that we have. And the number of cross-border transactions in terms of volume is going to reach around 200 trillion by 2027 is what Forbes is suggesting. And alongside that, the recent report published by PwC, the Global Economic Crime Report, says that 30% of the fraud transactions that happen every year is on account of a poorly designed authentication process within the organization, right? So just to connect these dots, I just want to kind of emphasize how important is this topic of future modeling of authentication authorization is in the current context, right? So with that said, let me just get started with Anand. So Anand, what do you think are the current challenges that the industry faces from an authentication authorization perspective?
Thanks, Vaithi. It's an interesting question. And also to add to your context, right? So when we talk about hackers hacking into organization and taking data, the very first thing that they compromise is a user ID, right? And then gets on to escalation to privileged IDs and then take out the data. So your first line of defense is your authentication mechanism. And what is the challenge today, to your question? We are using passwords. Passwords are the challenge today. It's the age-old mechanism, maybe in the Roman time when the Roman army decided to turn around their duties, they had to give a password, and that has been adopted into digital in the early 90s or 80s, and that still continues. Even today, we talk about a policy that needs to be stringent for a password, right? That is the biggest challenge today in an authentication perspective. The other challenge that we have is authorization. Now, even if you have the latest technologies and have passwordless authentication, people forget as to the people should have access for the work that they do or the right to what they need to do the work for, that limiting the role-based access, right? That's the authorization piece. We tend to give out all access, all authorizations for individuals, and that also applies in a consumer environment. When a banking looks at it, they do not have a step-up authentication or an authorization that is required. That is getting better, but still it's based on OTP, based on password, things like that, which is really is the challenge today. We need to look at what is the latest trend and start adopting it rather than be more regressive and continue to use the passwords and OTPs. That's the biggest challenge today, in my perspective.
Very well brought out, right? So in fact, I still remember like 20, 25 years back, we just started with username, passwords, and then we went to passphrase, and then we went to OTPs, and we went to MFA, and what is enough? There is no end to it, right? So coming to Manikant, right? So the sophistication of cyber attack has evolved big time, right? So do you think that company has to do a complete overhaul at this juncture to come out of that traditional method of authentication? What's your view on that?
Thank you, Vaithi. Just a disclaimer, what I'm saying here is just my experience, nothing to do with my existing or previous organization. I would like to add one thing which Anand said. He said that there's a problem is we are using a password. In fact, using password is good, but guessable password, repetitive password, password in an Excel sheet is a problem. So, as you said, see, passwords, MFA, PIN, OTP, now zero trust, SASE, it's evolving across the industry. The real problem is not that we need to keep overhauling, because it happens when there is a requirement and when the business has to improve their cybersecurity posture. The only challenge is, are your customers aware? One. Second thing is, are you able to invest that type of budgets into this type of phases? Because over the period, you have invested in one technology and suddenly there is a huge transition and again you need to invest. So the transition itself takes a lot of time because the DevOps, DevSecOps, the production takes a lot of time. The overhauling usually does not happen overnight. It takes a lot of time, and sometimes the board does not even agree whether we'll be able to invest this much of time. So the simplest way is to say the revolution is important, but the overall does not need to be happening very frequently. It has, and because all these things have to sync with your existing previous data, all the data points. So in my view is it will take some time for every organization to adopt those type of overhaul, but it's not necessary every time you overhaul. But to the requirement of the industry or the regulatory compliance requirement, if you do, it's much better.
Absolutely, definitely. It's a big challenge to kind of get this change overnight, right? And talking about these authentication processes and new models and stuff, right? Often as CISOs and risk heads, one thing that we always fight with business is uh, the topic between security and customer convenience, right? So over to you, Kamaiah. What is your view on this? So how do you balance between security and user experience when it comes to authentication?
Yeah, yeah, it's a very good question. Thanks for asking. Um, before I answer this, of course, most organizations struggle. So the technology is improving, and there are different ways of authentication. And adopting those methodologies and technologies definitely takes time, and it is painful and convincing customers and users also. It's a bit challenging. Before I answer further on this, so I would like to emphasize on this, how important is authentication and authorization in the new era of digitalization, right? I was actually doing a survey with my close peers, try to understand that what is their, what are their pain problems, and it keep changing, right? Even if you see who was top 10, the list is keep shuffling between, and then the vulnerability priority changes. So I still see, I have queried, I have spoken to close to 9 organizations. They're very bigger organizations, and they still have this issue. The authentication authorization is one of the primary concern for bigger organization as well. So coming to your point, um, so how can organizations adopt these new technologies and by balancing and a seamless user experience? So there are different ways we can, I can definitely see there is a lot of shift in authentication approach uh, than a traditional password-based authentication. So there are techniques like risk-based and adaptive authentication. So you can always look at users' behavior analysis, like collecting a telemetry that from where user is accessing and what is how the location and biometrics, and also uh, the, the the device identity, and all such telemetry is becoming a key with respect to the risk-based authentication and adaptive authentication. On need basis, when you are accessing a critical asset, you can enforce defense and depth control kind of an authentication, like asking for a MFA, and you can force more authentication while accessing critical resources. It just if in case uh, there is a difference in the way user behaves, there is a change in the telemetry. So that's one way. That's one of the way, I would say. And then you can use your multi-factor authentication wisely. So you need not ask user always your multi-factor authentication on need basis. On again, it's depending on the behavioral analysis. You can push for multi-factor authentication. Then there is a SSO. Obviously, you can sign in once and then access different kinds of applications. So that's another way of. So allowing users, giving a choice that I would like to. So you can say that there is a OTP-based authentication. On top of that, you want to add one more layer of authentication. So we can let the user to use it. That way, if user himself adopting, the business will not have any concerns. Business says that I have a performance impact, so users are not accessing my application. So I don't want to have this layer. If user himself adopting this way, so it's actually enhancing the security. So on top of this, educating the customers. And the current digitalization world, the kind of issues what we are facing with respect to, I would say that RBI is doing a lot of security awareness campaigns, and even SEBI is doing it. That is all because of there are different kinds of frauds are happening. Just sending a link and users are clicking on it and falling for different kinds of digital payments kind of traps. So in this way, we have to educate the customers and also the internal users when you are proposing a different kinds of authentications. Yeah. So obviously the passwordless authentication is going to be the key for future. So these are all the different ways we can approach.
Thanks, Kamaiah. I mean, something that struck. Please go ahead.
From a practical example, what Kamaiah was saying, I have two bank accounts, right? One as the latest technology that uses FIDO for authentication for mobile banking and internet banking. Another one is password based and they call it a higher secret, which is another OTP based. I 99% use the other one, which as the latest technology. So as a customer, I prefer to make it more easier for me, being a security professional and more focused on identity and authentication. I understand that technology works fine for me. That might not be the right approach for people who do not understand the technology. That's where the awareness actually comes in and builds up. If that happens, then obviously the balance between the business and security gets addressed, right? So adoption of latest technology is a first step for us to solve that problem, is my view.
Absolutely, I think quite brilliantly brought out. So something that struck me when you were talking about educate the users before you bring in like additional authentication processor, because it's one of these very popular fintech back in the US, right? So they had a significant rise in their phishing attempts on their customers. So what they did is they implemented an OTP, and on top of it, they also had another authentication process where an OTP also gets delivered to email. So they had to kind of key in both the OTP. So they went big bang with that implementation across the globe. And that was a complete failure for them, right? So they had a lot of clients walking out from their business. It's a huge impact to them. So something that you brought out in terms of don't kind of go for a big bang implementation when you go for this, right? So inform your customers why you're doing this and all that. I think that makes a significant difference. So thanks for your point, Anand and Kamaiah. So we were talking about passwordless authentication, right? So what is the adoption rate in the industry as far as passwordless authentication is concerned? What challenges that companies have in terms of moving to a passwordless authentication?
Yeah. So this is a very interesting one. So before we say that why do we need passwordless authentication? So what are the kind of attacks and why kind of attacks we are seeing in the industry? We can look at it. So one is that when a phishing email comes, how many of the users, first of all, employees will take it because they're in the industry and they use their emails on day-to-day basis, and how many of them are clicking those links. So in spite of, we are being a highly regulated industry and we conduct these campaigns on quarterly basis. And of course, I believe RBI also does the same thing. And look at other organizations, how frequently they're conducting these phishing campaigns. So I do conduct because I have, the graph supposed to be, we expect that, it goes down like this. Because of new users are getting onboarded, the graph is always like this. So you cannot say that, just because of, doing a security awareness campaigns, you are safe and secure. So that is where there's driving factors, the passwordless authentication. So when a phishing email link comes, what is that first they're trying to steal is your password. So that's the primary thing. And what are the ways they do it? Doing a brute force attempt and also do a credential stuffing and as usual, the phishing emails. Phishing emails are very dangerous. There's a way of doing a spear phishing attack. So it's very, very genuine, and you can definitely, phish any employee, I would say, in the organization. So that's possible. So these are the reasons we are looking at, passwordless authentication. So as I mentioned before, the option is looking at behavioral-based authentication, like a biometrics, and also looking at multi-factor authentication and maybe OTP-based authentication. These are all the different ways. What it does is it improves enhances the security posture in a way that the challenging is just adoption. So maybe the new technology is a little, that tech-wise it might take some time, product to implement the new technology. But again, you need to look at the balance, right? So obviously the advantage is more, so I would prefer that passwordless authentication is definitely going to be a game changer.
Very well brought out, right? In fact, one of the point I also want to reiterate is most of the companies, right, also have legacy-based applications. So moving them to a passwordless authentication model is something that companies say that they have a big challenge in, right? And moving on from there, right? So now we have a lot of emerging technologies coming in, different types of authentication process. You touched about behavioral biometrics process and quantum cryptography and all that. So how is the industry adoption rate with respect to these emerging technologies? Anand, you.
Sure. So, as you said, there's a lot of technologies that are flooding in the market. We're talking about AI, quantum. I would leave quantum out because that's in a different league completely. But if you look at blockchain, which has been in the industry for a long time, but adoption has been less, apart from the cryptos, and AI is the new kid on the block, and everybody is talking about AI. I want to go back to the previous panel where Satish was referring to how do we use AI to look at, make it more customizable for the users, for the customers, right? The security organization professionals will also have to think in those angles rather than thinking about, okay, this is my policy, this is what I will do, right? We'll have to think about how do we adopt these latest technologies and make things easier for the users. So that should be the mindset shift for the security people, and that has a significant impact. So for example, AI today can look at any of your behavioral biometrics, right? So how fast you type, and what are the areas or websites that you have browsed, what are the speed at which you open a page. All these can be learned and made customizable for your own authentication profile, right? So AI can be used in developing a model for every user across banking sector or the fintech sector as well, so that they are secure and any deviations can be flagged and additional authentication step up, whatever needs to be done can be done. Adopting that would really help. And the other stretch of it, if you look at it from a blockchain perspective, now decentralized identity seems to be another topic in the market. Adoption is still low, but that is the next wave for identity access management. What does it provide? It provides the ability for the user to be managing and owning the identity, right? It is not centralized in an Aadhaar database that becomes the God database that everybody goes to, but as an individual, I can manage what I need to manage and control who can access that. And that is decentralized. So with that, clubbing with AI, which means that your credentials cannot be shared anywhere, right? Your personal profile cannot be shared without your permission going there, right? So the hack that can happen in a centralized database is minimized. That's what the newer technologies can provide if we have a different hat and start thinking from a user perspective rather than only thinking from a security perspective, audit perspective, right? So the mindset shift has to change for us to adopt the latest technologies. And there's plenty to offer in terms of use cases. Just like business, security can adopt it very easily.
I think very well brought out, right? In fact, a lot of technologies coming in, particularly from a behavioral biometrics perspective, which is, we see a lot of use cases in the compliance function, apparently these days when they do the KYC and all those. So we'll come to that in the later part of our discussion. An interesting question. No panel discussion these days happens without this abuse of term called API, right? So API is, for a very small fintech company, I get to understand from one of the other discussion is that they actually have at least close to 10,000 APIs, right? So it's totally an interconnected world, so you cannot survive without APIs. So having said that, how important it is from an authentication perspective to secure these APIs? Manikant.
So you clearly say that the interfacing of most of the companies are only in APIs today. And today, let's say even you book a ticket in a, it will be in a railway ticket or a air ticket, anything, it all happens through multiple complex API connectivity. And any one API which loses which has a very open, leaky authentication, the entire system goes for a topsy-turvy. So the entire API journey has to be more secure. The only challenge is the supply chain. You are not the owner of all the APIs. You probably may be federating or connecting multiple APIs to create a aggregation of multiple output. But though you may be the centricity, you have multiple people who are offering services to you. And now we have you have ad tech companies who also come to your APIs. So the challenge is, though the security authentication is very important, but you don't have control on it. Though you can put in controls, but you don't have the ownership. You don't have the ownership. So again, as per compliance and regulatory, you are accountable for it, because anything goes out of system is you are accountable. So the challenge is, how do you put controls which is not in your control? So it's not so simple, yet it's not so complex also. There are many tools. Even today morning, Satish was saying something like, we have to get into the tool fatigue to get into the control mechanism of securing. But again, API security is again, it's a big subject by itself. There are a lot of quantum companies are saying that they have quantum technology which can secure your APIs. The simplest way is, if you can secure your token to the near possible way, you're always protecting your API. Second part to it is awareness to your own supply chain, because how frequent they change the keys, how frequent they ensure that their APIs are tested frequently by an vulnerability assessment or pen test. Additionally, if they are taking any controls to ensure that they are protecting their crown jewels also. If that can be little bit more moderated, then API security is almost in place.
Just to add a additional point here, this is an example, real life example. One of my clients asked me to come and do an assessment of their API, all the APIs and provide, and they said we have about 50 APIs. Our team went there, we identified close to 567 APIs. The inventory of APIs is a bigger challenge, right? So it just spawns out everywhere. Anything that is being developed by a developer is by default as an API. And nobody cares about it because that's not the critical system. But unfortunately, that gets connected to the critical systems as well. So that is a bigger challenge. And as Mani rightly said, your ecosystem, and that is going to be your weakest link as well. If you are connected in an interconnected environment, ecosystem plays a very, very critical role.
Very well brought out. So API inventory, right? We just go and ask any CISO of a fintech that how well you're managing your API inventory, you will not get a clear answer to it, right? So it's always a big challenge.
It's good to have a CMDB for API very soon.
I would like to add a couple of 2 cents here. When you mentioned that we don't even have a inventory of the APIs. The another problem is you don't even have a API inventory. That means you do not have authentication there, because you don't even know which is your API. You haven't thought about authentication. Then what happens, right? I'm just trying to correlating that what we had in the last point. When a phishing email comes, you click on it. What next is you get access to these kind of APIs, and without any authentication, And one more angle to look at it, whether your network is segregated properly. You have any kind of a network segregation. If your network is flat, it's like a cakewalk for an attacker. So API without authentication, network is not segmented, and it's like a easy way to exploit or exfiltrate the data.
Great. I think something that comes to my mind is one of the top risks that is given by OWASP, right, is on API versioning. Leave alone the APIs, you don't know which version is actually running. You don't deprecate your APIs that you're not using. And that becomes a major threat vector for the hackers to actually go and listen what's happening, right? And that is becoming a major issue, something that you just highlighted. I just think of reading this somewhere recently.
That may be because the business want to continue that API for the users who are not interested to move to the latest APIs, right, or latest version of the application. So that's that's a major scenario that they're not yet deprecated that API. So that's obviously the opportunity for an attacker.
Cool. So with that said, let's move on to another interesting segment, just on compliance, right? So now you have too many regulations coming in, right? So we have GDPR, we have DPDPA, and now we have DORA, right? The Digital Operational Resilience Act, that's making a lot of noise. So companies, especially in the EU, has to be ready by Jan 18, 2025 with all the DORA requirements, right? So with all of these new regulations and compliances coming in, what kind of stress it puts on the development of the authentication methods? Kamaiah, to you.
Yeah. So let's look at the GDPR and DPDPA Act. So I think more or less they talk same language. So talking about data minimization, only take the data that is needed, and also data localization, have it within the India, and user consent management, and user rights, and user have right to ask questions and also erase the data. So that is the main focus, and the primary area they're looking at is data. And then when you look at the DORA and other regulation, I think PSD2, right? So DORA is looking at operational resilience. So even if there is a breach, and they emphasize that your application should be running without any disruption. That is what they're looking at. So they're looking at an incident response and doing a forensic analysis, and then making sure that your application is up and running all the time. And when you look at the Payment Service Directive, and they're also talking about having a stringent security standards for the customer. So in a nutshell, if you look at, right, all of them are talking the same language. Make sure that your data is safe and secure. So how do you protect that is, having a strong authentication controls, having a defense in depth controls, and adopting a new technologies available, passwordless authentication, whatever we discussed so far. So I think that is the way forward, and all these regulations are talking about the same language.
So I kind of agree with Kamaiah on that, right? So regulations typically are very generic in nature. They don't really do a prescriptive guidelines or anything like that. And that is for the organizations to interpret and see what makes it easier for them and adopt it, right? I don't think regulations really, regulatory bodies drive the technology, but rather technology drives regulations, is what my opinion is. Even the DPDPA Act is kind of what we have done in digitalization and being a digital India. That has driven the DPDPA Act, and and regulations are always post facto. AI came in, and now we are thinking about ethical AI, right? So it's always a post facto. So regulation typically do not drive, is my opinion. I don't know about yours.
No, I have a different opinion. Is what happens is, it is just a cause and effect from the regulation and the industry, because all the feedback which comes from the industry is only then made as a regulation, because the feedback which goes saying this is a problem, this is a problem, this is an issue, then they find that it has to be fixed. Then they make a regulation and a framework for it. For example, the recent SAVI framework which has come for cyber security, if you really see, there's a lot of intricate things which is they have written between the lines, sort of things. So even if you do 60% of that, you can achieve DORA. So there are a lot of things they have put in. So what I'm saying to say is, they have tried to fix maximum problem which has come from the industry feedback only. So as you said, whatever goes from industry again comes back to the industry to a regulatory perspective. But whereas the compliance, what I've seen is, it is in India especially, it is more of jugaad. So we find a workaround, we say, okay, this is not available, the regulation can be achieved through this way. So that still challenge is there. But again, with the regulatory guidelines getting more stricter, the kinds of audits that's coming, it is becoming more difficult to achieve that jugaad way. So you have to go that normal way where you are able to achieve that.
I tell you why I just asked that question, right? In PSD2, there is one requirement which says that companies has to establish the dynamic link between a transaction and the user authentication, right? And if this requirement comes in and if the organization does not have an authentication process through which they can dynamically link a transaction to the authentication, they fall non-compliance to it, right? So that now adds another layer of stress. Should I actually go in for another model? How much should I invest and all of that, right? So similarly, we have new regulations coming in. For example, in DORA, as you said, you have to control what is not in your control. So with companies, especially fintechs, they have partnership with a lot of banks as well, right? So what DORA says is you still have to take ownership if the bank system are down on account of which your customers are not able to make transactions. So how do you control something is not in your control? So how are you going to establish that? So I think these are facets that needs to be taken into consideration.
Hello. Yeah. So what you said is right. I agree with you. And when these regulators are talking about enforcing these policies, right? It is only applicable to certain industries. So suppose stockbroking industry, SEBI is enforcing you have to do third-party VAPT twice a year, and you have to do security awareness campaigns quarterly once minimum. What about other industries? So the same stockbroking industry is associated with many other third-party vendors. So third-party vendor security posters, it's definitely, it's like, it should come under DPDPA Act and that should be enforced. If that is not done, so it's not possible for the organization that is getting integrated with 500 and different kinds of third parties and making sure their security is strong enough is going to be a humongous task for the organizations.
Totally agree. So let's move on to the next question, right? So we have so many protocols, standards now, right? So we have FIDO, we have WebAuth, and now we have OAuth and all of that. So what kind of implication that these have going forward with respect to authentication? So what kind of evolution that you see in terms of these standards coming up, matching up with the new authentication methods? Manikant.
See, I'm a fan of WebAuth, so I will not talk about other thing. But the good thing is FIDO and WebAuth, every has their own pros and cons. Some is more of hardware centric, some has more of software centric. They don't store data on the servers. The good thing is they don't have a central database where the key is there and the hacker is able to access the data, the central key, and is able to do the private key plays a important role in all this authentication. The good thing is all this authentication helps you to onboard the latest applications on the fly, important. Second, it gives you the comfort zone of being more secure because they have secure layers put inside that. But the other side, other challenge is they have legacy systems, as you said earlier, and those applications, though they are new, but they are not still not upgraded to the new OAuth or web app. So these two challenges will still stay for another some more time, unless and until all those applications which is legacy has been built to the latest technology, and then they are able to authenticate. Otherwise, these two technologies are going to be, they are going to be superpowers in the future.
You want to add on to it, Anand? Okay. So, I mean, you guys have like sufficient experience in this, right? So can you guys share any use cases you've come across in terms of successful implementation of any new models of authentication?
Again, real life example for me is one of our clients, a global bank. They adopted FIDO-based authentication for their customer-facing application, internet banking, CIAM solution. And they were able to define these policies, learn from the customer user behavior, and continue to refine that. And they got to a very good stable state of a decent authentication, which also balances user experience, right? And it was a successful engagement project for the client. And the business really appreciated the way that both security and the business aspect, the user experience was balanced. So the top management saw this, and they are a global bank across the globe, branches and everything. So they said, if this is doing so well for customer perspective, why not adopt it internally? So internally, they got rid of passwords. They're using FIDO completely internally for all accesses, except for the legacy systems where very few really have to access, mainframes and stuff where very few have to access. They didn't want to spend the money and build a bridge between that, so they said no. But they adopted a very good authentication and authorization mechanism internally to compliance perspective, right? So that's a very good success story from my perspective. I don't know if anybody have a failure.
No, of course, failure I don't know, but recently Citibank retail went into Axis Bank. I don't know how many people transited. No, there's a beautiful transition happened overnight. So the entire authentication from Citibank happened on Axis Bank overnight. So I don't know how much of testing went in, but there was seamless integration there on a particular night, on a particular morning, when I logged into probably Citibank, it went into Axis Bank, and probably the entire authentication was same. But the only thing is, from a OTP based, they completely moved into an biometric based. So there has been a fantastic, success case for that.
Right. So, any final thoughts from you guys on how this authentication authorization is going to be and what to expect in the near future? Start with Anand.
Sure. See, the first line of defense is authentication, obviously, and the authorization. We think about the authorization frameworks, right? So that needs to be built upfront before a technology can be implemented. Oftentimes, organizations, large institutions, typically when it comes to especially customer facing, they forget about that kind of a framework, what needs to be changed, right? Typically in an internal environment, there is audits that happen, who has excessive access, continuous reviews happen, and they can tend to fix it. Maybe not use technology, but do it manually and tend to fix it. But in case of what happens in a customer environment, in a customer-facing applications, that tend to be a little more relaxed, because when you log into banking application, you have everything. Very few banks have, or fintechs for that matter, also have step-up authentication or a risk-based authentication. So those kind of frameworks have to be nailed down before the technology can be leveraged. So that needs to be done so that it is a bulletproof authorization model with a newer, latest technology from an authentication model. Where it goes, as Mani rightly said, it's very good for spawning up new applications while you have a platform which is well thought through and can give you the throughput that you're looking for these applications as well, right? That's more important from an authentication perspective, because if you are going to, let's say, open a bank account, there's multiple calls that goes in the back end as well, which to the various ecosystem partners and in collecting that information, coming back. All this requires throughput, and that throughput cannot be security bottleneck, right? So it has to support that. And that is why the latest technology is much better rather than looking at static passwords for API or password-based authentication in itself. That because that introduces lag in the entire system. That's my viewpoint.
So the entire the subject was on two things. One is on innovation and experimentation. So I read this. I don't know if it is live now. There is a bank in US where if you have the card in your pocket and if you pass by the ATM, it will send an SMS to you saying that next bill comes here. you're going to this your next billing cycle is going to be this one. This is your payment cycle and everything. Same is that if you by chance miss a payment, it will send an SMS when you pass by the bank or something. So see, that's one of the significant upgrade on your authentication authorization. You have given your consent, and they are able to see your nearby approach, and they are able to give you a message. That's very important. I don't, though it's not a very great innovation, though our guys get in an email and SMS, we're happy with it. But what I feel is when you pass by a cab, you're passing by a cab and you forgot on a payment, or you're traveling abroad, you forgot on a payment, then this will really help. And a lot of experimentation is going around this. And for example, I met one friend, CA friend, they are doing some robotic approach. Like there will be no person in a branch, there will be really robotics or kind of a self kiosk which will help you to make your own transaction without any person. Again, it's all authorization based. And third thing is like the so-called as the facial recognition authentication which is happening. I know at least 2 startups who are doing a lot of investment in doing this type of facial recognition, authentication in KYC and banking system or probably fintechs. So if you really see, we have really not invented much. The invention is less, but there's a lot of innovation. There's a lot of innovation going on in this one for sure. And the basic thing, as you said, no, there are a lot of experiments which will come to the innovation in future for at least in another 5 to 6 years. I see a lot of innovation coming and rolling out to people, which will help them to make the banking or any transaction faster, easier, scalable, and more secure.
Yeah. So I agree with Anand. So he raised that we repeated that risk-based and adaptive authentication. And I was actually doing a transaction a week back. I'm sitting in Bangalore, and my credit card was used somewhere outside Bangalore. I immediately got a call from bank saying that so-and-so amount have been detected from your credit card. Do you want to authorize this? So I think that is where we are heading. I think passwords are going to go away. This is my personal opinion. And so other than passwords, I think what my panelists are saying that behavioral-based authentication, biometrics-based authentication, OTP-based authentication, all these things is going to take place. And also having a strong DevSecOps approach while you are building the product itself. So it should be a security by design. And also when you are building security by design, you should also think about a user-centric approach. When you are building any kind of authentication, how easily user will be able to utilize the authentication approach, what we are proposing. So these are all the key things we should consider. And then when you build the application and also have a defense in depth controls and have a secure SDLC process that can validate your authentication approach, and also how your components are interacting internally, and the service to service authentication within the network and network segregation, and also when you are storing data on the cloud, and the cloud configuration can change at any point of time. So you should have a continuous monitoring in place that if there is any resource that is exposed to public and that has access to any sensitive data, so that's also a key concern for you, and you continuously monitor this configuration and make sure that they are all controlled, they're under your purview, and then you close those gaps. So I think with this, I think this is where we are heading, and yeah.
Very well brought out points, right? Something that you brought in, Manikant, right, about open banking. Right, so I think that's where the industry is heading towards, right? Particularly if you look into EU, there are a lot of neobanks coming up, right? Completely virtual banks, and everything is completely digitized. But having said that, the cyber threat landscape also is evolving, right? Because we're discussing before this about the video KYC, right? Now with the deep fake AI technology, video KYC is becoming more vulnerable. So many banks are now planning to do an extra level of verification post video KYC as well, right? So it's a balance of both. So that's what we just need to take into consideration. So any questions to our panel team?
Hi, thanks for this nice discussion. I'm Rajiv Anand. I'm a security architect and crypto expert in Bosch. Usually what we see, most of the methods of authentication and authorization, that seems as coming as a cost of losing privacy. Okay? So like you see PKI-based authentication for secure access, secure TLS or the biometric authentication, you eventually lose your privacy. So also in the line of the last comment, emerging this AI, like with the deep fake, you are sleeping and you don't know your credentials or identities are being used for authentication. So this can impact in several ways, including GDPR penalty to lose customers' trust and so on. My question is, how does several sectors, right from defense to automotive, looks into this as an issue? Is it a serious issue to different sectors? And how they plan to mitigate this issue? Yeah, thank you.
Take it, Anand.
Sure. So it's definitely a balance between privacy and security overall across cross-industry for sure. However, the latest technologies that are available, for example, FIDO from an authentication perspective, your biometric does not get transferred anywhere. Nobody stores it anywhere else in a database. It stays within your device itself, which is typically your mobile phone. It just uses the markers in that to create that key, which is then transferred, right? So it's not your biometric itself gets transferred. So there are technologies which can obscure and help maintain privacy. It's the willingness of the organizations to able to take that, and first of all, it's also the awareness, right? In terms of, from an Indian context perspective, we are still waiting on the guidelines on DPDPA as to how do we implement. But if you have to be a leading organization, you know what privacy is. It's not a new topic. You don't need the government to tell you what it is. But again, as Mani had said, we are still compliance driven, right? So we are waiting for somebody to come and say that you have to do this. Only then you can do business, otherwise you cannot do business. So that is the problem from a mentality perspective for not just India, but most of the countries as well, right? So, but there are technologies that you could responsibly adopt, which also balances the privacy. I don't know about the defense sector, so I'm not going to talk about that. But generally, across industries, private, commercial sectors, you could adopt technologies, latest ones, which also take into consideration the privacy aspects.
Yeah, agree with both of you, and yeah, rightly mentioned Anand. And your point is right that if we are storing biometric related data and the privacy concern is there and the fines are very big. Yeah, that's one of the reason I think we are not there yet. But I think we can look at other alternatives, not only the biometric based authentication, and also there is a cryptographic way of doing authentication, right? You have a public key, private key, and which is safe and secure, and we have been using that. So we can look for those authentication instead of passwords. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Most of the banking industry gives apps for logging in, right, instead of web applications. Now, mobile also have different versions, different flavors. Each come with their own security stack. Some don't come with that, right? How, as a banking platform, will you ensure that your solution is always same, irrespective of which mobile I use or which device I use? Because that is where the main concern is, right? Because an attacker can be sitting within the mobile. You might have a big authentication in your app, but it has to pass through the mobile infrastructure to reach your banks, right? So if that is compromised, then your entire authentication is compromised. So how do you ensure that irrespective of the device which you use, your application is always safe?
Yeah, so that is where the behavioral analysis plays an important role. So when user is talking to the application, so there is always a device ID being sent for an authentication, right? Along with the device ID, the way user types in the password, the way he interacts with the application, all this telemetry is being continuously monitored. And if there is any change in the way in which he is accessing the application, that's where you will come to know that whether attacker is accessing the application or a normal user is accessing the application, including the geolocation and the device ID and the IP address where the application is being accessed. So these are all the important criteria the telemetry that is important in the authentication approach.
So additionally to those authentication approach, we also have real-time application security profile that being done for mobile applications specifically, right? So most of the banks which are very serious about security typically leverage that technology as well, built as part of their application, on which basically the application is built, right? So that it real-time checks whether your mobile is also compromised or not, right? If there is a SIM swap that has happened or not. All these are the telemetry for the application authentication that happens, right? If something is wrong or there is an indication, then gets up into the next level of authentication, risk-based authentication, all the other things come into perspective as well.
Yeah, so the telemetry binds with the SIM as well. Along with the geolocation, device IDs, it is SIM identification and the behavior.
Absolutely. Just to add on there, right, that's what they call it as the adaptive authentication process. I could remember an incident, right? I mean, my own company where there was a user who actually made a transaction, a customer who made a transaction in Australia. So he's from Australia. The next few minutes, we saw another transaction happening from the US, right? And so we could sense that there's no way that in 2 minutes he can transfer unless he's a Marvel series product, right? So from Australia to US. So these are new methods where, companies can actually look at in terms of prevent these attackers from making some anomalies. So this is what is actually getting built into the system these days. Adaptive authentication is one important security thing that is actually built into the new age security products for authentication. Any other question?
Anand, you spoke about a bank implementing FIDO authentication, right? Just curious to understand, was it hardware token based or is it a mobile phone based, and how customers actually transition to it?
It was mobile based, and it's a global bank, and most of the countries that they operate had a significant mobile penetration as well. So it became easy for them to basically move there, right? So, and anybody today has a smart mobile across all countries, and that has basically has become our lifeline these days for everything else as well. So they just leverage that as the authentication mechanism. So it made it easier for them, in fact, seamless. People were able to use mobile banking as well as internet banking, just using the mobile phone app.
One last question, if there's any. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Saronan. I work for LTM Mindray. I have a question regarding this deepfake videos and challenges. I think the previous session, I think one of the topic was how quickly the other countries are using the video KYCs to speed up the KYC completion. There comes the risk of having the deep fake videos, right? So I would like to understand how Indian banking or overall the banking security, practically approaching it. What are the mechanisms available at the moment? It could be a framework or it could be a technology front. In overall, this is the risk I see, and how are we prepared? I would like to understand from you, expert, practically how is it tackled right now?
So my perspective, again, it is very new, right? Last year and a half in terms of deep fakes have come in, and AI is building the model. I mean, models are getting built up that can really mimic a real person and give that fake and deep fake in terms of voice as well as video. And the defense mechanism for that is still getting developed, right? So I had met with one of the new age technology companies from the US because we wrote an article on deepfake. They reached out and we had a discussion with them. They are looking at basically leveraging behavioral biometrics, right? So it's not simply just facing a camera and blinking your eyes, turning left and right, but rather the way you speak, what are the pronunciations that you use, basically use those things as well to build a profile. Again, this is a startup organization, right? So this is the solution that is getting built now. So your question of whether banks are thinking about it, maybe they are, But I don't think there is a solution in the market yet that can address this challenge. That's my view.
Yeah, so yeah, he rightly mentioned that currently there is no technology that can detect deep fakes at the moment, as far as I know. And but how we are tackling the situation is educating the employees if such kind of videos being circulated in the organization. So there is a lot of WhatsApp scams going on. So it's like a CEO impersonation or the bigger CXO level employees impersonation, right? In such scenarios, we educate the employees. So with respect to deepfaking technology, as my panelist Anand mentioned, we educate the users that how do you detect whether the video is deepfake or not. So whether eyes are blinking and the pronunciation, and then those are the areas the users can observe and then identify whether it's a deepfake video or not. In the first place, when these kind of deepfake videos are circulated, right, they're mostly targeted for some kind of a phishing attempt, right? So asking a employee or user to click on this link and then do this transaction. Or, I'm in an urgent meeting, please transfer this money to the specific account, I will pay you back. So these are the ways the attacks are happening, as far as I observed. So the only way is being vigilant about the security and if any such kind of attack comes, right? So you need to be vigilant and then send out the communication back to the InfoSec team and they can check and come back to you. So that's where we are right now. Maybe, definitely, it's a AI-based technology that, used for doing a fraudulent transaction. Definitely there might be a AI-based solution soon.
So one thing I just want to add, like Anand said, it is just not only an image with movement of eye and the retina or your eyelids. Recently there was a video which came where Bill Gates was being interviewed by some lady, and it was a deep fake where she was abusing about Microsoft that they have stolen data from some company and they used it. It was a deep fake data. But it was very easily identifiable because the Bill Gates hand movement was not very relevant. He never uses right hand. He always uses left hand. And the way he keeps his shoulder is always in a different angle. So it was very easily identifiable. So these type of data points has to go into the system, analyzed, and then it has to come back. So as of today, video KYC can be very good for people who are senior citizens who are not able to move out of home. They need to do the KYC, it's good. But as you said, deep fakes is not very relevant in many markets. It is just in the preliminary stage. It has not taken over as a primary mode of authentication. So it will take a lot of time to understand the metrics and again bring in these controls.
I think that's about it. Thank you so much, Anand, Manikant, and Kamaiah for the insightful session. Thank you so much. Thank you, team.
Thank you so much for this wonderful session. We would like to present token of appreciation for all the panelists. We will be having a 15 minutes of short break. We'll resume the session at 4:15 p.m. Thank you.